Before I continue any further, I am going to be showing the clothes because this is a traditional clothing. I'm going to be showing the clothing only of the Native American people. And the reason why is because the clothing of the Europeans in the Americas is very similar to the clothing of just the Europeans. And we already went through the European clothing, so there's kind of no point in showing the clothing of the European Americans. So we're going to be showing the actual Native Americans. So of course, we're starting off with the Inuit at the very north. Now, Inuit clothing was very similar to Siberian clothing, and I don't know if any of you guys remember the Siberian clothing from the last stream, but yeah. But of course, this is due to a similar climate and because the Inuit people came from Siberia. So common items would be heavy fur coats, which went down to the waist for men and to the knee for women, which came along with a fur-lined hood. Then the coat would usually be a simple color, with the most common ones being either white, black, gray, or brown. Then underneath this coat would be worn trousers and very thick boots. So here's an example, the Greenlandic Inuit. Now, it does take a genius to figure out what part of the world they live in. And yeah, this is actually one of my favorite kinds of clothing I've seen. Very nice patterns, very colorful, especially this part and this part. And even the boots look quite nice. So I'm quite a big fan of Greenlandic Inuit clothing. Okay, moving on. Now we get to Arctic. So Arctic, by what I mean by this, is the kind of clothing that was basically worn um, in northern Canada, but was not worn by the Inuit. So it was actually very remarkably similar to European clothing, with men wearing shirts and trousers and women wearing ankle-length dresses. Women would also cover their hair with a veil or scarf, while men would often have a vest over their shirt. And both of these would wear soft shoes. Let's look at some examples. So here are the Tlicho, or however the heck you pronounce this. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce half these letters, but it looks like an I, L, and O. So, that's just how I'm going to pronounce it. And again, right, if it wasn't for how this woman looked, you'd probably think this was just like European women. But yeah, Tlicho in northern Canada, the Innu, and again, the Innu are close to the Inuit, but they live in Quebec, I believe. So we can see again very similar clothing to Europeans. Okay, and so that's it for that. And now we're going to move to the Pacific Northwest. So Pacific Northwest clothing was most recognizable for their button blankets, which are worn over the upper body. And these usually had totemic symbols, often stylized animals or faces, and they often served as symbols of clan histories, duties, and rights, as well as a marker of one's identity. Among their clothing, red and black were the most common colors both for the blanket and the everyday clothes. And underneath the blanket, a long shirt with similar clothing would be worn, which often extended down to the thighs and knees. And underneath this would be worn trousers. For headgear, a variety of headgear would be worn, which would come in the form of small round hats with an open top, or a tall rounded hat, but the most common hat was a cone-shaped straw hat, which was round at the bottom and most square on the top. Clothing would be relatively unisex, but trousers would be more common for men. And shoes were sometimes worn, but this was not always the case. So here's some examples. So we have the Simshan, and these are in British Columbia. Well, it's actually racist to call it British Columbia. Well, yeah, sorry. Anyway, so we can see again the obvious totemic symbols that are on all of these men's shirts. We see the blankets that, one, two, at least two of them are wearing, and to some extent, all of these guys are wearing some kind of blanket. And yeah, these are sort of stylized mythical animals. We see the very interesting kind of hat that they're wearing, the trousers, and then the shoes. The Nisga, which again, this guy looks almost exactly the same as this guy. And we can see again the blanket with the long, very long tassels and the same kind of imagery here. This is actually was taken in Vancouver, BC, which is where I live most of the year. The quinault. So this is much simpler, but we see the color red being worn here, and again the long overcoats. The Haida people, they also live in British Columbia, and this was kind of the hat that I was talking about. Sort of more round at the top. Well, they're both round, but I guess more of a cone shaped at the top and more round at the bottom. So wearing a huge nose ring. So it shows you that British Columbians were liberals even back then. And then again, the big, um, coat with the long tassels. Starting off with, yeah, North American native clothing because, of course, Native Americans across the Americas wore a huge amount of different styles of clothing. Last time we looked at Arctic, Pacific Northwest, and Inuit. And so now we're going to look at North American, which is kind of the most standard image, especially here in Canada and the US. And so you guys will be very familiar with what we're about to see. So we're starting off here with the Plains Apache people. And yeah, of course, one thing that we'll notice among pretty much all these people is the use of feathers. These are ceremonial and have great importance for these people. The Chiricahua are also another kind of Apache people, mainly in New Mexico, I believe, and perhaps Arizona as well. And so this is sort of more typical female attire there. The Western Apache, and again, same group of Apache people. And then we have the regular Apache. So this is a pretty good picture, I feel like, of kind of summarizing everything that I'm about to show, right? So both of the kids here are wearing the headdresses. Now, obviously, they don't actually belong to the children, they belong to the parents because the headdresses were symbols of basically a warrior, right, and what they'd achieved on the battlefield. So obviously, this kid's like what, 3 or something? This kid maybe is like 6. So they haven't achieved this, but it's nice that they get to wear it. We see that they were wearing moccasins here, which, are kind of like a softer kind of shoe that was made, specifically kind of for all kinds of weather. You have these little white things, I'm not sure what they're called. Um, and then yeah, we sort of see a lot of braiding. I mean, especially for women, but even for men. So I think this guy, right, he kind of has some kind of braid here too. And so yeah, and then of course the trousers that were pretty commonly worn, especially by the men. Women could also wear them, but it wasn't as common. All right. Here we have the Colville, who I believe lived in Montana, although I could be wrong. So yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures. I just thought it looked very cool. Also, there is something I want to say, but I'll wait till sort of we get to the end of the Americas before I say more. Kootenai. So these people live in British Columbia, and as many of you know, that's where I am most of the year, specifically inland British Columbia. So we still have an area called sort of Kootenai after these people. Nespelem. So this is a good example of like what an individual warrior would have looked like. Now, of course, we see he's using a gun, so and of course this is a picture, so clearly this was taken after the Europeans arrived. But yeah, he's using a gun, but otherwise it's still pretty traditional, has the whole headdress thing, lots of necklaces, the 2 long braids, the trousers, and then the moccasins. So it's a pretty good representative of what a lot of the men used to wear. Wishram. This is a very nice colorized picture. I mean, you can kind of tell it's colorized, but also says it up here. And yeah, again, the 2 braids, lots of necklaces, although the woman is likely not wearing trousers, but we can't tell. The nez percé, or the nez perce, I'm not sure how Americans would pronounce that, but it's supposed to be pronounced nez percé, which means pierced nose. And I think these people are somewhere out in the Midwest, although as Americans, if you guys know where specifically the Nipahse used to live, let me know. But again, this is also a very cool picture, and this is clearly the Midwest. We can see it from the background, and even the clothing, right? It's kind of made to fit in with the background and all that. Also, one thing that we'll notice specifically with a lot of the women is that they would wear these kind of, I don't know, beaded things under their neck or under their earrings that would go kind of down to their waist. And then also a lot of these little tassels. The Wanapum, this is also a great picture. Um, Whoever was the photographer for this did a great job. And we can see the one feather again, like it's a girl, so she isn't really a warrior. But yeah, very nice, vibrant clothing, and even the horse looks very cool. Oh, the Walla Walla. It's interesting. I knew 2 kids who came from a place called Walla Walla, so it's clearly named after these people, and I think that's either Washington or Oregon. But yeah, again, very common to see the 2 braids. That was like really common among North American Native people. The Arapaho, who I believe are Oklahoma. I could be wrong there, but I think they're somewhere from around there. The gros ventre. Now, this is just funny because, or the gros ventre, as probably the Americans would say it, but it's pronounced gros ventre, which literally means the fat belly people. So I'm not sure if there were a little too many, you know, dad bods, when the French came and discovered, quote unquote, these people. But yeah, and we can see, both of them have just one feather, and the two men and the woman again have the typical braid on the left and braid on the right. And then they're all wearing also these big blankets, so that was also pretty common. This one's one of my favorite pictures, the Cree people, and the Cree people kind of lived in huge parts of central Canada, so one of the most prevalent groups. Um, and I think they're actually like the largest Native American group in Canada. But yeah, also other than the feather and the two braids, she also has extremely nice clothing. So very long tassels on her little cape thing, the feathers there, and very nice symmetrical kind of clothing. So yeah, this one's pretty cool. This is one of my favorite outfits. I don't know what you guys think, but I quite like that one. Oh, and then this is where this guy is a bit, I think, a bit overboard, with the feathers. The Atacamekwa, who I believe are somewhere like around Michigan, but again, I'm not 100% sure. This is all vague knowledge I have. And yeah, we can see he's initiating the kid into some kind of dance. And so that's why he has so many feathers. And then of course we also see the war paint too. Otherwise, this picture I always thought was pretty cool. The penobscot. Um, yeah, again we see the one feather. And I don't know, I think her dress looks very cool. I mean, this is obviously somewhat Europeanized clothing, but still looks very nice. There's the shinecock, as I like to call them, or the shinnecock, probably is how you pronounce it. And they're kind of in the middle of a dance here. Um, so again, we see it with the feathers, you know, lots of feathers, especially at these dance things. Um, Again, all these little white things, I'm not sure what they're called. And yeah, more of that. The Menominee, I believe they're somewhere around Lake Superior, probably Minnesota, but I'd have to check in on that. This guy has his, traditional little hatchet thing. The Sauk people, they're also in that area, Wisconsin kind of area. This is the whole family actually. Got I don't know, I think it's the mother and then husband, wife, children. The Sulto. Yeah, a lot of these have French names actually. Um, and we see the little white things going all the way down to the floor, the headdress, all that. Seneca. Yeah, this is also one of my favorite pictures. I mean, this woman's probably very mixed with Europeans. Probably not, she doesn't look that native, but nevertheless, very cool clothing. Pretty simple but nice, and I always think these moccasins look cool, especially when they're decorated. The cayuse. Now, this is a crazy kind of headband, um, or headdress, I should say. It goes all the way down to the floor. But yeah, it means that this guy clearly was very respected and had achieved a lot. Got the Lakota people, and they're related to the Dakota people. So yeah, they're kind of in that whole Dakota area, North and South Dakota. Um, we see the one feather again, the very long earrings. Yeah, very nice red as well. And I think this is just one crazy long braid, so that's kind of cool. The Ho Chunk, I always thought this name was funny just because it reminds me of like chunkiness. Um, so yeah, again, they're in a dance, lots of feathers. The Osage. So the Osage, I believe, live somewhere in like Iowa or Missouri or somewhere in that area. And again, I think this guy is a pretty cool dramatic pose. Nice long blanket. The Pawnee, the Wapo, don't know where they are from. The Cupeño. So these people are in California, and there is sort of a separate style of clothing that the Californians wore, but some of them also just wore the standard native North American native clothing, depending on where in California you were, of course. So the Northern Shoshone. So they're around like Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. That's where these people lived. And it's kind of cool how the clothes the horse is wearing and the women are wearing are the same. But yeah, again, see the feather, the braids, the very long tassels. The Bannock. So they're in Montana, I believe. And yeah, this guy looks pretty cool, pretty self-confident. I mean, you can see also some of them wore more of these like stocking or legging things. So we can see that over here. Again, both the men and women would wear braids and a lot of earrings, and he has a sash. Serrano, so we're back in California, very colorful. All right, and so that's it for the North American style. Now we're gonna move on to the Ojibwe. So yeah, the Ojibwe, as we can see, their clothing is fairly different from a lot of the standard North American style that we normally see. Probably the most obvious thing, right, is that they're wearing these, round hats, which generally, everyone else was wearing a headdress, as we can see here, 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 you know, here, here. So that's one big difference. I mean, this guy has the braids, but this guy doesn't. And then also we can see that they have, both these men are wearing a sash, and also they're wearing moccasins still, but yeah. So what I was saying about the Ojibwe, right, basically is that clothing's more simple, right? Looks a bit more European, and especially women's clothing is kind of just like, you know, top and a skirt, and that's it. But I still think it looks cool. All right, so that's it with the Ojibwe. Now let's move on to Mohawk. All right, so yeah, here is the Mohawk clothing. And so we can see it is obviously very similar to a lot of the other North American clothing, but it is still a little bit different. For example, we see that um, he isn't really wearing a headdress, just a lot of different feathers. A lot more fur is being worn, of course, more of these stocking kind of things. The moccasins, they still have it and they're still decorated. The woman is wearing trousers, although she's also wearing a kind of a dress over it. And yeah, generally a bit simpler style. All right, and now we're going to move to Northeast American. I create a separate Northeast American category because what you guys will notice is that Northeast American clothing, it is similar to just regular North American native clothing, but there are some differences which we will soon discover here. Mainly that it is a little more, I guess, decorated and over the top as compared to just the regular Native American clothing. Let's look at some examples. The Piscataway, who I believe are around Maryland or Virginia or Delaware. Okay, so take note of this. When we get a better picture, I'll explain it more, but this is one of the kind of distinguishing things. Here's a great example, the Mataponi people. So one of the biggest differences between just the regular North American and the specifically Northeast American style of clothing is the kind of headdress, right? So still a feather kind of headdress, but this is much more circular. Um, it kind of all originates in one place in the center and then just kind of branches out. So it's held together by this headband. And personally, I don't think it looks as good, but that's just my opinion. And so yeah, we see that is being worn. Although there are of course other headdresses. So we see this or other things. And we see a lot of kind of this leather, hide kind of clothing that they're wearing here. And yes, some face paint too, pretty common. All right. Now this is probably one of the craziest examples. The Nansemond, like the amount of just stuff on this guy's body really is insane. I mean, of course, we have this entire like I don't know even know headdress on this guy's back, and then all the feathers here, the bear skin, the regular clothes, all the kinds of necklaces, the crazy amount of face paint, and then the feathers that go up, behind, straight up, and down from his face. And then even the guy next to him, he has that round kind of head style. So personally, this is way too much for me. but this was how a lot of them would dress, especially for special occasions. So that's it for Northeast American. And so now let's move on to Southeast American. Southeast American clothing, yeah, is more simple compared to Northeast American clothing. Although it's probably a bit more elaborate than kind of just like the regular, or sorry, it's more simple compared to Northeast American, but it's still less simple than probably just North American. But we'll notice that there's a lot more white that's being worn, and kind of it's a bit baggier. So for example, we have the Okanichi here, who I believe were in Georgia, and so you can see, right, a lot more flowy, a lot more of these little white things going on, and we again still have the one feather. We have a lot of these, I don't know, string things coming out from there, from his clothing. And again, obviously, it's a dance. We have the saponi, and again, we see the same kind of thing. The feathers here, the big one big feather on his head, and then a lot of these little tassels and little strings and all that coming out from under his clothes. And then yeah, he also has this. I don't know if this is really supposed to be a weapon, probably some kind of ceremonial weapon, but I'm not sure. All right, but sometimes I feel like actually it could be even more elaborate than Northeast American clothing. So these are the Kushata people who, again, I think are around Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, they go hard with the decoration. I mean, they all have all these feathers coming out from their head, and then they also have all these little strings coming down under from their chest, from their hips, from their waist. Um, and yeah, and then also these like little wing things. I'm not even sure what exactly I would call them. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And based on the numbers, I don't know if these guys are in some kind of competition, but if I were to choose my favorite, probably him. I mean, his looks cool too, but it's also rainbow, so I don't know what that means. So, oh, never mind. It's Louisiana. It says it right here, so I guess that's where they came from, Louisiana. But this guy, we can see a little more what's underneath all this stuff. And so we see he has the little decorated patterns all over, and then just a lot. It seems like it's pretty heavy. All right, and so that's it with Southeast America. Now we're going to move on to Chickasaw and Choctaw. So let's go. All right, so Chickasaw and Choctaw. So Chickasaw and Choctaw, you guys will see, is actually quite different from pretty much all the other kind of Native American clothing. And the reason why will become obvious. So let's just take a look. First of all, we can see it's much, 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 much simpler. We don't have any of the headdresses. We don't have any feathers. Um, we don't even really have the moccasins per se. This is much more of a European look. And if I were to guess, probably their clothing changed after their introduction to the Europeans, because I think the Chickasaw and Choctaw were part of the so-called civilized tribes that the U.S. just decided to kick out regardless. And so yeah, it looks yeah much more kind of like a European style of dress, with a little apron thing here. But it is still unique and it is still distinctly native, and I think that's what's really cool. I love the lace work here, the little stripes, and even though it's pretty simple, I think it looks very good, especially with the one color of the dress. And then the man here, as we can see, is wearing trousers and more European style trousers as well as a hat. But again, the shirt looks quite cool, so I like this quite a bit. Okay, and now let's move on to the Seminole people. So what we'll see with the Seminole people is again looks much more European. We have much more loose fitting, longer dress. Uh, the baby has feathers, but other than that, they're not really wearing any feathers. And yeah, relatively simple, compared to most of what we've seen here so far. Okay, now we'll get to Californian. So as I'd said earlier, Californian clothing is fairly distinct. So here we have an example of the Tolowa. So it actually took me a long time before I realized that this woman's actually not wearing a shirt at all. So the only thing that's covering her parts, let's say here, are all the necklaces and then this little piece of cloth. And yeah, we can see that she's not wearing any shoes. It's almost kind of like a grass skirt, but just goes down a lot longer. And it sort of makes sense given the climate and the heat in California. I can imagine. I've been there once, but it was like one night. All right, and so here is a better example, kind of what it would look like for both genders. So these are the Nisenan people, and we can see that the men just don't wear any shirt or any shoes for that matter. And they're wearing this like weird face thing. I'm not sure what I would call that, but you guys can see what it is. And just simple white trousers, that's all they wear. And yeah, the women as well, they're wearing like a skirt that's somewhat long, but not too long with tassels. And then they're also all wearing feathers there as well. The Chumash people, so I think these are more Northern California, and you can kind of tell because it looks more like the North American style of clothing. Then we have the Tataviam people, and yeah, this is very, very, very simple. We can see, right, men, well, I mean, these are boys, but they aren't wearing any top. Then the girls, just wearing a simple dress and yeah, pretty light clothing. All right, and so that's it for California. And now let's move on to Western Arizona. All right, so here we have the Zuni people. So again, Western Arizona, right, is where these people come from. And so we can see it's a very unique style of clothing. Um, they're wearing not trousers, but just these like leg putty things. And yeah, no shoes. And then they also have an interesting kind of bob cut, shorter hairstyle. And yeah, then pretty just simple tunic on top of it all. And another example are the Kakopa people. And this, I always liked this picture. I always thought it looked quite cool. So yeah, she's wearing a pretty simple dress and then a cape. And yeah, that's about it. Hopi. The Hopi have a very interesting and unique hairstyle. So we can see that over here. And again, pretty similar, right? Just one simple dress and then a cape. And yeah, no shoes either. It's pretty hot out there in the deserts of western Arizona. All right, and so yeah, guys, that's it for the United States. Now we get to Mexican. So yeah, Mexican clothing resulted from the mixing of native and European styles into the recognizable style we all know today. Men would wear all white, which included both shirts and trousers, and they would wear a sombrero or a similar looking straw hat. For footwear, they would usually wear shoes or sandals, and women would wear a dress consisting of what tended to be a white top and a colored skirt decorated with striped embroidery and floral motifs. So let's take a look. So one example are the Duwamish people, which is weird because they live in Canada, but I don't know. Unless maybe I got the wrong picture. That could always have been the case. But maybe they just somehow got the style. But yeah, either way, regardless of whether the Duwamish wore this or not, this is an excellent example of Mexican clothing, right? We see the sombrero, we see the all white, the trousers, the shirt, shoes, and then the women are wearing, you know, a relatively simple dress with a floral motif. And so yeah, that's an example. Another example here, right? The Zoque people. And pretty similar. Main difference is they're not wearing shoes here, at least except for her. And they're also wearing a uh, little necktie or something around their neck there. All right, the Zapotec. So again, looks much more similar to this. And we can see the woman is also wearing some kind of hat here too. But yeah, very nice floral embroidery over here. And this time he's wearing black trousers. And another example are the Itza people, and they mainly live in northern Guatemala. So yeah, technically not Mexican, but it's right next to Mexico. And we can see that they are wearing pleated clothing, so that's when you have kind of several layers, so to say. So we have one here, one here, one here, and one here, right? And so again, we can see the main color is white. They're all wearing some kind of round hat or sombrero. And yeah, women wear the floral motif, so looks pretty cool. All right, now we get to move on to Totonacan. So the Totonacan clothing was similar to Mexican clothing, although it is recognizable due to its usage of white as pretty much the only color worn, and the dresses that would only go down to the calf. Now, if they were decorated, it was only at the fringes, such as at the bottom or the top, and they would wear a mantle over the top. So sandals were sometimes worn, although oftentimes no footwear was worn. And then men would also wear white, but they would wear trousers obviously, instead of a dress, and would wear what is now considered a cowboy hat or sombrero, right? So here's an example. Here are the Otomi people. And so, yeah, this is more central, eastern Mexico. That's an example. All right, and then now we're going to move on to the Maya. So Maya women were known for their distinctive kind of dress, which was calf length, made of a main color, and decorated in a square near tartan style. And then men, on the other hand, would dress completely in white, with their outfit consisting of a shirt, trousers, and a straw hat. And then they would wear shoes, which were usually sandals. So here's some examples. Here's the Tzotzil, and I always liked this picture. I thought it looked pretty cool. Um, and this looks like it's made out of wool. I'm not exactly sure if that's the case. The Kakchikel. I think these are girls all going to school because otherwise I don't really understand why they're all standing so close to each other. But yeah, it looks pretty cool, especially since they're all dressed the same. All right, and that's it, guys. That is it for the Americas. Um, Now, you might ask, why haven't you covered South America? I will get to that very soon. We're going to go to Africa next. But before we do that, tell me what you guys think of Mexican, and then I'll explain what's going on with South America. Okay, so let me explain what's going on with South America. So, obviously, when I was doing this, traditional clothes of the world, it's not like I forgot the entire continent of South America, and I guess also Central America and the Caribbean for that matter. But the reason I have not included them in this part of the presentation is because basically I just could not find a good map of like basically where the native people of South America once lived. As in, for example, if you look up a map of, you know, South or North American native people and then a map, right? It'll show you basically the traditional boundaries of all the different ethnic groups that were once living there. You can find that for Canada, you can find it in the US, you can find it in Mexico. But for South America, I couldn't find anything. Now you can find out where the modern native people live, but obviously most of them have either died out or have greatly reduced the territory they once owned, so it becomes practically useless. That's reason number one. Reason number two is because there wasn't really any consistent clothing style I found. Kind of each group had their own sort of style. And so at the end of this presentation, I will have one that includes other, basically including people from all around the world whose clothing style didn't really fit into any of the categories I've made so far. And so you will see some South American people in there. But that pretty much is the explanation of why I'm skipping directly to Africa now.